right? So in today's class, we'll first discuss like how to represent a strong entity, right? So what do you mean by a strong entity? So an entity with a primary key of its own is known as strong entity. So for example, I want to represent a student entity, right? So student entity is characterized by the attributes ID, name, and total credits. TOT under credits, total underscore credits. So how to represent a strong entity? By means of a relation schema. I'm going to represent a strong entity by means of a relation schema using the same name of the strong entity, right? So here the name of the strong entity is going to be student. So I'm going to represent it by a relation schema student with the attributes credits, right? So this is how I represent a strong entity set, right? So how do I represent the strong entity set department? Lokesh, so Lokesh,
Sir,
so how do you represent a strong entity department? So department is a strong entity in this diagram, right? ER diagram. So how do you represent a strong entity?
sir, double-edged. I have no idea, sir.
So a strong entity is represented by the represented as the it is represented as a relation by using the entity name. So the relation name is going to be department, and the attributes will be department name, building, and budget, right?
Okay, sir.
Right. So how to represent a weak entity? So whenever we have a weak entity which does not have a primary key of its own, then how to represent a weak entity? A weak entity set becomes a table that includes a column for the primary key of the identifying strong entity set, right? So section is a weak entity set with attributes section ID, semester, and year, right? So section is a weak entity set. It does not have a primary key of its own. It is dependent on the strong entity set course. So whenever I need to represent the weak entity set, I'm going to represent it by means of the attributes course ID, section ID, semester, and year, right? So we are going to represent the weak entity set by a relation named section, right? So the relation name is going to be same as the entity name. It is going to be the union of the primary key of the strong entity with the other attributes that are present in the weak entity, right? So it's going to be course ID, which is going to be the primary key of the strong entity, primary key attribute of the strong entity, union of all the other attributes present in the weak entity, right? Section ID, semester, year, right? So this is how you represent the weak entity, right? So the next thing that you need to know is that how to represent a relationship set. So whenever you need to represent a relationship set advisor, so there exists a relationship set, relationship advisor between the student and the instructor entity sets. So we'll be including the primary key of the participating entities, right? So the primary key of student entity set is going to be ID, and the primary key of instructor entity set is going to be ID. So we'll prefix student.id, we'll prefix the attribute with the entity name, right? So the relationship advisor is represented by the attributes student.id and instructor.id, right? So a many-to-many relationship is represented as a schema with the attributes of the primary keys of the two participating entity sets and any descriptive attributes of the relationship sets, right? So whenever you need to represent a relationship set by means of an relation, right? So the relation name is going to be advisor, and it should contain the primary key of the participating entities. right? So here the primary keys of the participating entities is going to be student.id and instructor.id. So that's how you represent a relationship set by means of an relation, right? Right. Right. So how do you represent the relation student department? Right. So student department is a relationship that exists between the student and the department. So how do you represent the relationship set student department by means of a relation? It should contain the
Student ID and department name.
student. It should contain the student ID and
Department name.
Department
correct.
name.
Right. So it should contain the department name. So whenever I need to represent the student department, student underscore department as a relation, it should contain the primary key of the participating entities. Right. The primary key of the participating entities is going to be ID and department name. Right. So ID is from student. So student.id, comma department dot department name. Right. So it should contain the primary keys of the participating entities, right? So this is how I represent the relationship sets whenever I am going to convert an ER diagram into relation.